Hi, everyone. I'm Lana. Thank you for joining me. The White House Coronavirus Task Force held its first briefing Friday in nearly 2 months. Health officials pleaded with Americans as several states see an alarming surge in new cases. Natalie Brand has the latest.
As you can see, we are facing a serious problem in certain areas.
In the first public briefing in nearly 2 months, Vice President Pence and members of the Coronavirus Task Force acknowledged surging cases in a number of states.
As we are reminded, as we see cases rising across the South, that we still have work to do.
If we want to end this outbreak, really end it, and then hopefully when a vaccine comes and puts the nail in the coffin, we've got to realize that we are part of the process.
The vice president says he'll visit some of the hot spots, including Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Still, the Trump administration maintains it's now better prepared to handle the surge.
The reality is we're in a much better place.
Task force officials urge the public, especially young people, to follow safety measures such as wearing masks. But the vice president defended President Trump's decision to move forward with large rallies.
We're creating settings where people can choose to participate in the political process, and we'll continue to do that.
Amid the pandemic, the Trump administration is once again taking aim at the Affordable Care Act, asking the Supreme Court to strike it down. The Trump administration filed an 82-page brief 1 hour before a midnight deadline. The brief argues that the law is unconstitutional after Congress ended one part of the statute. Lawmakers eliminated the tax penalty for those who don't buy health insurance.
If you have a pre-existing condition, you will no longer have the benefit of access to quality care. And the list goes on of the benefits that it would overturn.
Speaker Pelosi is expected to bring up a bill next week designed to strengthen the Affordable Care Act.
And Natalie joins me now from the White House. Hi, Natalie. I'm wondering how the officials addressing this new surge of coronavirus cases talked about the states that are seeing the most dramatic rise.
Well, today's briefing definitely took on a serious tone. At the same time, the vice president still trying to maintain a sense of optimism about reopening all states in the country, despite these surging cases that we are seeing in a number of states. But he said that the president wanted him to address the American people because of some of these surging cases that we are seeing in the South. And task force officials specifically called out 16 states that they are closely watching, and they listed 10 of them, states that we are seeing not only increased cases, but increased test positivity rates. And at the top of that list, Texas, Arizona, followed by Florida, a number of southern Sun Belt states, and also Nevada and Utah. So those are some of the areas of concern. As I mentioned, the vice president expected to visit some of those states. In fact, Dr. Birx also expected to accompany him on a couple of those trips and get a sense of what's going on the ground. But the task force also mentioned they say the majority of these new cases are coming up in younger Americans, and they also wanted to stress that young people in particular need to take those extra safety precautions, such as wearing masks, keeping social distancing. They are concerned about community spread among not only young folks, but people without symptoms, those asymptomatic carriers that may be causing some issues in these communities where we're seeing the spikes. Lana.
But Natalie, how do they reconcile then that advice that they're giving from the White House press briefing room with what we've seen out on the campaign trail, and how the Trump campaign has not required social distancing, not required masks, and not done anything necessarily to protect against asymptomatic carriers spreading it further?
And the vice president was asked specifically about that a couple of times. You heard him respond in that clip, saying essentially that the American people still have the right to assemble and participate in political rallies. Of course, we know earlier this week in Arizona, where we saw that packed room filled with thousands of young supporters, there were not many masks being worn, even though they were encouraged. So again, we're seeing this become a political issue issue in a lot of places, with this debate over being told to wear a mask and some people pushing back against that. And another takeaway of today's news conference briefing was the task force urging people to follow the guidance, emphasizing follow the guidance of state and local officials. And so in cities where there is a mask mandate, they are trying to walk this line of telling folks to listen to what their community is saying based on what's happening on the ground there.
Yeah, we saw our own Paula Reed really ask the vice president about following his guidance to follow local regulations, but then the campaign not necessarily following those. We mentioned earlier that the White House briefings, we haven't had any in nearly 2 months, and they used to be a daily occurrence. So why did officials decide to hold a briefing right now?
Well, I think there's no question that we are seeing surging cases in several states, and the vice president did mention that that was one reason why the task force wanted to get in front of the cameras and talk about some of the things that they are doing behind the scenes to help address the surges, work with states, work with the state and local governments to make sure that they have the supplies and the PPE and the assistance that they need. We also heard them emphasize some of the talking points that we've been hearing about an increase in testing leading to an increased number of cases, although, of course, we are also seeing increases in some places of hospitalizations and other complicating factors. So this is just one piece of the puzzle, but we did get some good advice from task force officials, really trying to get the message out to younger people and people who may not be presenting with symptoms to be mindful of their role to play in helping to once again flatten the curve.
Yeah. Well, Natalie, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Affordable Care Act. You mentioned that late Thursday night, the Trump administration filed a brief with the Supreme Court claiming the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's otherwise known, is unconstitutional. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the administration would plan to do if Obamacare was dissolved, with so many people counting on it, particularly in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, that's the big question. What repeal or replacement option do Republicans have at this point? But to get back to that new legal challenge, the administration signed on or is supporting this challenge by Texas and a number of other Republican-led states, saying that once Congress repealed the individual mandate or that tax penalty for not buying insurance, that essentially the entire law fell apart. The Solicitor General saying once you rescind the individual mandate, the Affordable Care Act falls. You may remember that happened in 2017 when the then Republican-led Congress passed the GOP-led tax bill. So since then, that was one part of the Affordable Care Act being kind of unraveled, or an attempt to unravel it. But there's obviously now a split in Congress. We have a Democratic-led House and a Republican-led Senate. The Democrats fighting back, including Democratic-led states who are defending the law before the Supreme Court. The timing of this all comes before election season. The Supreme Court is expected to hear arguments on this case next term. A decision not expected until next year. But obviously, this is also playing into campaign politics. We've seen former Vice President Joe Biden talk about health care, make this a focus, specifically the Affordable Care Act, at recent events, an event yesterday. Even today, he had campaign surrogate Senator Kamala Harris having a virtual event to also defend and talk about the Affordable Care Act.
All right, Natalie, just before I let you go, I want to talk about some of the president's tweets about signing an executive order to protect the nation's monuments and statues. It obviously comes as protesters have been demanding the removal of Confederate statues that they say are a symbol of hate against Black Americans. Can you tell us what exactly would the president's executive order do?
So we are still awaiting, Lana, to see the text of this new executive order, which we got word it would be released tonight, a Friday night ahead of the weekend. And it's unclear exactly what this would do beyond perhaps reinforcing the current law, which is the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act, which does make it a crime to destroy a monument or statue that commemorates service of those in the armed forces, according to the text of the law. And it makes that punishable by up to 10 years in jail. So we'll have to see whether this executive order expands upon that or just re-ups the current law. This all comes, as we've been discussing all week, and in recent weeks, the controversy around some of these statues and monuments nationwide, triggering demonstrations and also conversations about these statues in cities across the country, including here in D.C. You were talking yesterday about the Emancipation statue in Lincoln Park, which some critics say formerly enslaved Americans did not have a say in how that was built. And for that reason, some demonstrators want to take it down. But it is important to note that the mayor of D.C., Muriel Bowser, did address this yesterday, saying that the district needs to have a reasonable conversation, she says, about deciding when and how to take down statues. She said, quote, not have a mob decide they want to pull it down. So we're seeing this new order at the executive level, but we're also seeing these localized conversations at the local level about how to move forward in the wake of these very emotional demonstrations.
Yeah, and I know that some Republicans have signed on to the idea that some of these statues need to go, but there's still no word from the Trump administration that they see any path to removing any of these statues that promote the Confederacy or are seen by so many as racist statues. There's still no word from the administration that they're willing to change on that, right?
We have not heard directly from the president on this topic today, but we did hear from him in the Fox News town hall yesterday on this topic. It's really, he pivots to the idea of law and order and calling some of these protesters who want to take down the statues agitators or terrorists or people out to destroy history. So we'll have to try to ask him directly that very question, but this is being seen, again, this has turned into a major politicized issue that speaks to his push for law and order and trying to go against protesters that he believes are destroying property or promoting violence.
Yeah, interesting to see Mayor Bowser's reply to that in a way that that seems to address both law and order and the need for thoughtful conversations. Natalie Brand, lots happening in Washington.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.